Our first speaker, well, let me just say that now we shift gears, literally, and we move to a very different type of technology. Adam Greenfield, whom I have known just for a few years, but have become a sound admirer of his work because he really manages to have a critical perspective, a sort of relentless critical perspective on extraordinary technologies that most of us are inclined to stand in awe of, right? Though I am totally with you on the relentless critical perspective. So he's the founder and managing director of Urban Scale and a senior fellow at London School of Economics, the Cities program, which is a very exciting program. Between 2008 and 2010, he was Nokia's head of design direction for service and user interface design. He is the author of Everywhere, written W-A-R-E, right? Everywhere. Subtitle, The Dawning Age of Ubiquitous Computing, which came out in 2006. The second book is Urban Computing and Its Discontents. You get the picture there. I added that, that's not in the title. Written with Mark Shepard. And the latest book, which I think is a brilliant essay that just blows your mind when you read it, Against the Smart City. Now, mind you, this title comes, and this sort of position, I guess, comes from somebody who has been deeply embedded, I'm sorry, in the world of these technologies. You know, it's not like an outsider who mistrusts and then goes against. No, this is from the inside. Adam. There's a clock in case you need it.
Awesome. Thanks, Saskia, for that incredibly warm introduction. Good morning. It's so good to be back in New York, my hometown. This morning's talk is called On Transmobility, Personal Mobility in and for the Networked City, and I might add for networked citizens as well. And it is a rather speculative take on some new and emerging technological and technosocial potentials that we see arising out of the intersection of networked, computational, digital information processing, transmission, and representation systems, and the city. I want to start with the conventional take on the future of urban mobility as delivered to us by the IT vendors and the automobile manufacturers and their sort of captive admirers in the academic industrial complex. The future of urban mobility is something that we are told has something to do with this acronym or curiously strange little bit of language, V2X, in which the X could stand for V, vehicle-to-vehicle communications, V2I, or vehicle-to-infrastructure communications, or V2D for vehicle-to-device communications. The vehicle is a node of a global network of information flows moving through space and time and communicating information about its whereabouts, its location, its activity, its load, its velocity, its destiny, all of these things back to the network. And there's one thing that I want to convey to you about this vision of V2X, which is that it's almost completely wrong. It notably, not to us, is that okay? Can you hear me? Yeah, okay. V2X doesn't really take account of this, which is, you know, the reality of the way that people get around. A decent chunk of the world's population get around in a decent chunk of the world's cities. This is, of course, Lagos, Nigeria, where informal transportation provisioning is responsible for, you know, a very, very high degree of what mobility the citizens of that place actually do manage to achieve. And lest you get the idea that informal mobility is something that only takes place in the global south, I am at pains to remind us all that here in New York City, there's an equally potent, if somewhat less visible, informal mobility network. This is the dollar van network. If New York City, if metropolitan New York City's dollar van network were considered as a standalone enterprise, it would be the 30th largest public transit system in the United States. So this is something that is simply not accounted for in any present reckoning of the V2X complex. But, you know, there are other qualities of the ways in which we get around cities that are not really countenanced in this vision, notably this one. We've already heard Richard this morning talking about a slower and more inductive way of knowing the city. Here we see a daily reality. This is not so much about the pressure of high-velocity commuting in extraordinary high-capacity infrastructural thoroughfares. This is about a considered way of moving through the city at the speed of life, accessible to the elements, certainly, but also accessible to the other people around you. This is a way that a great many people get around, and what I like about this is that it offers us the opportunity of stopping at will, of turning any place into just that, a place, taking the space of mobility and turning it once again into a grounded, placed, bodily known, embodied experience, not really accounted for in the V2X complex. Something above all, which is not accounted for in the V2X complex, is an idea that originates in this man's mind and has since taken the world by a certain degree of storm. This is, of course, Henri Lefebvre, the famous French socialist, urbanist, thinker, sociologist, who gifted us with the notion of the right to the city, which is to say, not merely the right to be seen in public, but the right to actively and physically participate in all of the city's currents and circuits of exchange and negotiation. He argued that to really truly be considered a citizen of a place, you have to be physically able to be present in all spaces, all parts, all times of the city at will, and with no undue fear that you would not be welcome there under force of violence or threat, sense of exclusion, or anything else. The right to the city. Extraordinarily important notion. Not really encountenanced at all in the V2X conception of things. So the question I come to emerging information technologies with is this one coming out of Lefebvre. How do we underwrite the ability of all to move freely in the urban field and to participate fully in the life of the city? Not so much getting around merely, but getting around as a means to an end, the end of transactive capacity, exchange with other people around us, and participation, full, embodied participation in the life of the city. We have an apocryphal tale that illustrates some of the dangers of trying to design our politics into our infrastructural decisions, into our technologies. It is said that Robert Moses, the famous top-down imperial planner of New York City mobility options, had some classist and possibly even some racist tendencies. And it is said that he designed these tendencies into his articulation of New York City's mobility infrastructure. He looked at the world around him as it appeared in the 1920s and 1930s and observed that if you wanted to restrict the use of the green spaces, parks, and recreational activities at New York City's periphery to the landed gentry, you merely had to exclude public transit from access to them. And therefore, the bridges and the overpasses were ostensibly designed at a low enough height as to prevent public buses from passing beneath them, thus instrumentally excluding the beaches, the parks, the greenways from access to the less privileged. Now, in years since this story has been told, there's some question as to whether this was in fact Moses' intention, but nevertheless, when we try to design politics into things, we run the risk that history will play a joke on us. If indeed this was Moses' intention, it was certainly undone by what happened in the post-war period when working class people for the first time gained access to personal automobility in cars that would slip sleekly and quietly beneath these underpasses and open up access to those green spaces. So even if you wanted to design exclusion into things, that exclusion, that attempted exclusion, was undone by technological and technosocial change. And I view this as sort of a caution to myself as a designer, because what I want to do is just the opposite. I want to design free access, open access, shared access, and an expanded understanding of the commons into our mobility systems. It is quite possible that history will play exactly the same sort of joke on me and the people who share this set of ambitions as it did on Moses. Nevertheless, I think it's worth trying to do so. I think it is worth trying to think about our mobility systems and our technological systems that enable mobility from the beginning to enable this sort of open, shared, common access. I have a proposition for you, and the proposition is this one. Information is the substance of the new urban mobility. Information about where we are in space, where we are in time, what sorts of options we have available to us, what sorts of alternative ways of getting from one place to another the city offers us, what sorts of opportunities, risks, emergent conditions await for us in the urban fabric. Information is absolutely the substance of the new urban mobility. Information from all sorts of sources, not merely affinity analysis or sentiment analysis from the things that we say on Twitter or Facebook, not merely sensors embedded in the streets beneath us, not merely the vehicles that we drive in communicating with the information network, but things as humble as these security cameras bolted to a wall in Barcelona. Information from all over the place gathered and used as the ground of analysis, used as a way of understanding the fabric, the environment through which we move. But if information is the substance of the new urban mobility, we absolutely must ensure that these people can use it. These villagers in a colonia in Medellin, Colombia, as well as, or possibly instead, of these users of information. This is the conventional, thoroughly mainstream articulation of what digital information network technology looks like when applied to problems of urban congestion and mobility. This is IBM's Intelligent Operations Center for the city of Rio de Janeiro, a favorite punching bag of mine for many reasons, not least of which because it does start from the idea that we can gather all of this information up from social media, from sensors, from cameras. It starts with that self-same idea. But it takes that information and the analytics based on it and reserves it for the exclusive use of the urban administrative elite, of the metropolitan and municipal administrators themselves. Anybody who knows anything at all about technology knows that having gathered that information and having gone through all the trouble to perform predictive analytics on it, you could offer those findings back to the public at something close to zero marginal cost, either as raw data or as the products of analysis. But in IBM's conception of the world, that possibility, that potential is never envisioned. Information is for the exclusive use of management. This is a system that's consecrated to the needs of administration. So I would argue that these people are in at least as good and possibly a better position, better able to make advantage and to act on the knowledge being gathered through this framework than these people. Certainly, these are the people who are moving around. These are people in literally a hardened underground command post in a central location in the city. Now I ask you, who is more likely to make better real-time tactical determinations armed with that information? Is it the set of people who are actually trying to negotiate the place in which they live and through which they move, or is it the set of people who are empowered with the management of that space? I've got a second proposition for you. Mobility is a space as well as a condition. It's enough of a space that people fall in love on the subway. People fall in love on the train. People fall in love riding a bike or stopped at red lights. If people can fall in love there, what else can they do there? If we are to understand mobility as a space, I think we need to understand that the challenge of mobility is something much, much greater than simply getting from point A to point B. It's just not about merely origin and destination, but about something that happens to us and for us in between. As a matter of fact, a friend of mine, Georges Amar, former head of prospective for the RATP, the Parisian Rapid Transit Authority, once said that in the interests of getting away from this very, very sterile notion of efficiency, there are at least two ways to earn time when thinking about urban mobility. We can shorten a trip with speed, which is sort of the conventional response, or we can fill it with activity. Now, I wind up taking the Excella between New York and DC or New York and Boston a couple of times a year. One of the things that I've noticed is that sitting in the quiet car with access to open Wi-Fi the whole time it does exactly what Amar suggests. It fills the time of that trip with activity. It makes it a useful space for me, not so much that I'm fetishizing productivity, but that I'm able to colonize that space psychologically and make it my own and do what I will with it, whether that's for entertainment or for writing or thinking or aught else. I don't notice the time passing, and on at least one or two occasions, I've gotten into South Station and I've thought, you know what, I wish I had another couple of minutes with this. So I take Amar's point. Mobility doesn't need to simply be about this very mechanistic notion of efficiency. Third proposition for you. Everyone has the right to mobility. Everyone in the city. Old or young, rich or poor, physically abled or otherwise. Everybody has the right to get around. This is something that we very conveniently allied in many depictions of vehicular mobility particularly. As a matter of fact, I want to suggest that the city can be thought of as a platform in technical terms. and that the new mobility can best be thought of as a service running on top of that platform, but an open service with a politics of universal access designed into it from the beginning. And I don't think it's a stretch to argue that that conception of things would make what I'm talking about fundamentally different from prior notions of urban transportation. The aim is to present the citizen with a single coherent mesh of mobility options wherever they happen to be in the city. This challenge, weirdly enough, it does have something to do with vehicles and infrastructures, but I don't really think it has much to do with emerging vehicular and infrastructural technologies, although, as we'll come back to later, the self-piloted automated car it presents such an incredibly potent nexus of ideas, transformational concepts about mobility that we cannot neglect its power to completely rewrite the script on all of these things. And I say that as somebody who's ordinarily more than skeptical about claims of techno-determinism or techno-utopianism. I think that the challenge here has something more to do with interface design and representation than it does about vehicles and infrastructural technologies themselves. I think that the challenge here has to do with raising information to a common platform and making it accessible to people through whatever aperture they happen to have available to them. Most often, to answer John's question, what is the vehicular and mobility equivalent of the mobile phone? I would argue to you that it is in fact the mobile phone. That the mobile phone that each one of us has on us already, that there are almost certainly as many of them in this room as there are people, if not more, that we use this as the aperture via which mobility information reaches us, that of course we also design common platform interfaces into our vehicles and into our public spaces, but that be the primary aperture for people receiving information about the options available to them. A mesh of options that is extraordinarily Catholic, that's open, that includes elements like new infrastructure, like here a BRT station, bus rapid transit, a very, very effective way of squeezing increased efficiency out of existing roadways and mobility modes and thinking about mobility modes. Not merely the new infrastructure, but the new rolling stock that's optimized for that structure. New networks and new business models that use old vehicles in new ways. Now, I would argue that when you raise any sort of a vehicle, be it a car or a bike, to the network and you make of it a potentially shared public resource, you leverage it unbelievably. You increase its efficiency anywhere up to 10 times. It becomes a very, very different proposition than the vehicle that we understand now. We leverage new conceptions of the instrumented streetscape, including here parking sensors that are embedded beneath the asphalt and are capable of notifying the network whether a parking space is currently occupied or not. We encompass new modes like bike sharing, as well as old ones like informal van-based mobility networks, and even older ones like these ferries operating in Hong Kong. As a matter of fact, we also leverage, and here's one of my favorite points out of Amar, we leverage the oldest mobility mode of all, being able to put one foot in front of another. We bind these things together by new ways of visualizing their use. Here's a lovely project from the Spatial Information Design Lab. This is a map of the digital matatus. This is a map of informal transit provisioning in Nairobi, Kenya, presented as a conventional public transit system map. We bind these things together by new ways of determining requirements for the siting and provisioning of infrastructures. This is something from Ciclo Rota Centro in Rio de Janeiro, where essentially the siting and positioning of stations and routes on a 30-kilometer bike path through the center of downtown Rio was crowdsourced, was determined by people themselves in a series of assemblies that were dedicated to that very proposition. We bind together new ways of delivering services, including the idea that there may not need to be a bus stop at all. If the bus can simply propose to people where it is identified a critical nexus of riders are waiting for it and telling them in real time, wait at such and such a corner, that this is the most efficient way or route for me to pick you up. We see new uses for land, including the conception of shared streetscapes. Here's the Insadong district of Seoul, where an existing vehicular thoroughfare has been, through some fairly subtle interventions, converted into a neatly shared street where pedestrians, bicycles, and automobility are able to coexist with one another and find a point of conviviality. And new ways of thinking about urban space. Here, a bicyclist's map of street slope ratios in San Francisco. that ordinarily cars don't need to think about. But I can promise you, if you're on a single-speed fixed-gear bicycle, you wind up thinking about quite a good deal of the time. Above all, I think we need new pricing models to reduce decision thresholds. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, this is the controversial bit. When I lived in Helsinki, Finland, for 3 years, when I was working at Nokia, I had access to a transit pass that was given to me by my employer, by Nokia. And as a result, I didn't pay for public transit. And as a result of that, I didn't think about using it. If it happened to be going in a direction that I was interested in, I would hop on or hop off. There wasn't any of this deep involved negotiation that's involved in trying to work out a cost-benefit analysis in real time. If indeed we are rational actors as consumers of transport, such cost-benefit analysis winds up foreclosing a great deal of options for a great many people. It is certainly the case that most riders of public transit are dependent riders. They're not discretionary riders, but they're so dependent on it that the fluctuation of even $1 or $2 in the fare price makes an extraordinary difference in how they're able to get around the city. Most dependent riders of public transit have more than one place to go in the course of a day. It's not simply that they need to go to work and get back again. It's that they need to do things like drop the kid off at daycare and then go to work and maybe pick up something at the pharmacy on the way home. This sort of trip, when you're talking about even a relatively small and manageable amount for most of us, very rapidly adds up for people in ways that they can't always control, which is why I would argue that everything that I'm talking about, the public transit component of that, be subsidized entirely by the state. This is the controversial bit, but I think that that is absolutely necessary to reduce the sense of commitment, the moment of hesitation at the very threshold of entering the mobility mesh. I think also that we need new ways of thinking about ourselves. Enrique Peñalosa famously says that paradise is not when every poor person in the city has a car. Paradise is when even rich people feel comfortable in taking public transport. And I think that this is a psychological negotiation whose moment is upon a great many of us. We need to discover the public. We need to rediscover the commons. And we need to rediscover our fellow citizens in ways that have less to do than speeding through the city in this capsular exoskeleton that we think of as a car, and more to do with the negotiations that undoubtedly and inevitably occasion being on public transit. Above all, we need new ways of combining all of these things holistically and systemically, so systems and passengers both radiate information at all times, pass through something called fully homomorphic encryption, and this is the technical bit. Fully homomorphic encryption is an emerging technology that allows us to take information that we do not necessarily know the nature of and perform manipulations on it. So that part of the problem with specifying that all of our systems, all of our vehicles, and all of us ourselves reveal our information about whereabouts, location, association, activity, and direction in real time is very clearly a privacy issue. Once we can run these things through the black box of fully homomorphic encryption, we can operate on this data without revealing much about ourselves in it. We can perform systemic calculations that allow models of efficiency to be cut to fit to real-time demand without giving much in the way of personally identificatory data up. This is the grail. This allows people and vehicles to act on what they know about the real-time state of the world, including things like tram stops being closed for the night and the availability of near fallback options, founded on information of the right kind, in the right place, at the right time. These three previous images are something that I worked on at Urban Scale. This is the mating of an e-paper display through the RFID coil of a touchless transit payment card. We have a working prototype of this, and what this allows the transit fare card to do itself is to let people know right on the verge of entering the system how much they have available on their fare card for use, which gets around that problem that so many of us have had, which is trying to enter the system and being rebuffed and hitting the turnstile and having the turnstile not turn and having a backup of 3 or 4 or 5 people cursing at us behind us form. If we can get this sort of real-time access to information at the right place and the right time, we can use the existing system more efficiently. All of this must be ported through well-designed APIs, application programming interfaces. This is the other technical bit. An application programming interface is a conduit that allows one piece of technological system hardware to talk to another or software. A well-designed API will result in a multiplicity of data, the widest possible variety of data being annealed in a well-designed personal interface such as this one from CityMapper, which allows the user to make choices about all of the options that they have available to them at this very moment, tells them how long it will take them, how much it will cost them, how many calories they may burn, and even the existence of things like rain-safe routes. Now, this works so much better in London than it does in New York because TfL, Transport for London, has a wider variety of real-time APIs that are available to it than the MTA. As a matter of fact, the MTA doesn't really issue very much in the way of real-time APIs. So there has to be an informatic infrastructure that is precisely calibrated and designed to achieve the ends of transmobility. If we have that, yes, we have something that I think of as transmobility. In technical terms, on-demand, intermodal, point-to-point mobility with beautiful seams and low decision thresholds as a free and open public utility. Now, what do I mean by beautiful seams? And technologically, very often, you'll hear the phrase seamless. I like to say that every time you hear the word seamless, you should append the word after it, lie, in brackets. Because as anything as wildly heterogeneous and complex as an informatic, technological, computational, digital system is, the seams are where the power lies. And if you smooth them over, you disempower the users. If instead you design the seams to be seen, accessed, and used by users, you give them power. The power that people need to get to jobs, to get to training and education, to get to healthcare and childcare, recreation and leisure, shopping and socializing, and even simply idly exploring the places they live. If we can design transmobility on this nature, this very speculative collection of ideas, if we can design something that responds to these concerns and conditions, maybe, just maybe, we can put some flesh on this notion of the right to the city. I thank you very much for your time and attention.
Thank you very much. There are 2 mics here for questions, if anybody. And do introduce yourself.
Thank you. Alfonso Diaz, MSc in Urban and Regional Planning from the LSE, but I never put it to any use. I got the sensation that you are very hot on technology, that technology will save the day. And
do you have a question?
Yes. Yeah. That is the question.
Is that the question? Am
Yeah.
I hot on technology? Do I think technology will save the day? No, God, no. I don't think technology will save the day at all. But I do think, to respond to Saskia's perennial concern, we need to design technologies that are urbanized. We need to design technologies that are appropriately scaled to the infrastructures that we use in the world and to the practices and to the habits and to the types of mobilities that we already inhabit and embrace. Somebody will come along and try to impose technology on us through the act of deploying it, through the act of signing contracts with municipal governments and other governing bodies. Somebody will come along and try and argue at extraordinary cost that technology is the answer to all of your problems. What I'm arguing for is a sensitive and enlightened design of the interface to those technologies and to certain very strict provisions in the underlying nature of the ways in which those technologies and infrastructures convey information such that ordinary people can understand and make maximum use of them. And I think that there's a fair degree of daylight between that notion and the notion that technology will save the day. Of course, if that doesn't come across, then I've failed. But, that's always, hanging your toes over the edge of the surfboard is always the most interesting place to be.
Hi, Greg Lindsay. I'm speaking later this afternoon and wondering how much material I have left after that. That was great. My question was, Adam, have you read the report that came out? Or I guess my question is, what lessons can we learn about the public utility side of it from the Tallinn transit system? I don't know, did you read the report that the Royal Institute of Sweden has published on this?
No, I don't tend to read reports from the Royal Institute.
Well, this is the first comprehensive one. This is the first comprehensive report on the system, and according to their calculations, ridership only rose 1.2% because of the free part. And there was very promising signs that I think the most sort of marginalized community in Tallinn has up 10%.
Yes.
But I guess I'm curious your thoughts on what we can learn of that, what you would expect from if we had this in place and was fully implementable, because what they found was people were actually substituting walking trips with rides on public transit versus using the car. And the Swedes suggested if you want to get cars off the road, just tax the cars directly. Don't try to do free transit. So I guess I'm curious your thoughts based on Tallinn or anything else on what the system would do to behavior.
I have no problem with taxing cars directly. I've never argued for binary either-or solutions. I think that what we need is a portfolio or a basket of solutions like that, both with the idea that getting people out of the car is probably a good in and of itself, sorry, Audi, and towards shared transit ridership. What I think we would get from, so I'm not an economist, and I think that's fairly evident, but what I have seen of the economics of it is that there are speculated to be improvements in the economic potential of regions that are anywhere from 1.2 to 1.5 times the revenue that is lost in not charging users for ridership, so rider fees. And I think that you can make a very strong case that there is a portfolio of social and direct economic benefits that follow on to the subsidy of public transit. Now, what I'm talking about, public transit is only one component of this mesh that, really eventually invokes every vehicle, every infrastructure, every system in the city, and allows people to move from point to point through a wide variety of modes and conveyances that may at some point include private as well as public transport. So it's not as clear-cut as all that. But I've seen some very, very encouraging numbers about the longer-term potential of moving us towards a fully subsidized public system. I think that's a fantastic notion, something that we ought to be aiming for, but I understand why there might be some resistance to that.
Hi, you mentioned universal access, and I'm currently studying the many barriers for people with mobility disabilities, especially in New York City. I'm curious how you think technology plays a role in improving accessibility for people with mobility disabilities and the aging population.
This is a fantastic question. I don't, actually. Yes, I think assistive technologies are useful and important and interesting, and as I begin to lose my own personal mobility, my knees are shot. I was in the Army for 5 years, so I don't really get around as much as I used to. I look forward to the envelope of technological augmentation that will help me negotiate the city as an older person. But I think that I was just in a workshop in this question in London, and what we wound up proposing was that probably the most cost-effective, but even more importantly than cost-effective, the most socially effective thing for the transit system to do, instead of enabling wireless, mobility augmentation technologies, was hiring people that we thought of as mobility advocates. 2 or 3 of them per station, maybe even more in peak load times, to help people negotiate and form some kind of relationship with them. And there are, again, this is not necessarily an either-or question. These are not exclusive potentials. There's the potential both for individual technological augmentation as well as social augmentation through people, through things that we've begun to forget about as possibilities. I mean, communication is a technology too, conversation is a technology too, and I never ever want to let go of the potentials that are realized through that set of technologies.
Hi.
Hey.
I see your vision kind of as a, very cheap, convenient transportation system that's like almost as good as teleporting. But there's a problem, and it was a problem with cars as cars became more common and streets became congested, and it's a problem with transit too. I moved here from Jacksonville, Florida, a city with a terrible public transportation system, but there are good things about that, because if you were willing to take the risk of a bus not coming and take that long bus ride to a place that was unpleasant to walk to, you always had a seat, and you always had 2 seats. New York, you have a wonderful system that goes everywhere, but the downside is, you have to stand up, it's crowded, it's a less physically pleasant experience once you get on. And so how do we negotiate that trade-off? I mean, how do we, that is to say, the better the system is, it's just like with highways. The better the system is, the more overcrowded and unpleasant it is. And how do we avoid that kind of unpleasant choice between convenient and miserably overcrowded and inconvenient and undercrowded?
I think you do that a bunch of different ways. I think you have a wide variety, the maximum possible variety of modal options, such that, you know, if at any particular moment in time your absolute need is to minimize your exposure to other people, you do have other ways of getting from point A to point B if that's what you want to do. But my other way of answering that has to do with that word comfort and pleasant and things like that. This is not going to be a universally positively received comment, but I'm not convinced that cities are entirely about our personal comfort and our personal pleasure. You know, I think that there are, in the end, equally important and pressing things to achieve in the world as maintaining a bubble of personal comfort and pleasure around myself. And as an urbanist and an urbanite and somebody who loves cities, not to say I'm a masochist, you know, but I'm perfectly happy to pay that cost of having my transit system be really well loved and really popular and well used.
All right.
I'm not sure. I think I probably agree more than not, otherwise I'd still be in Jacksonville, but
Very good.
with some ambivalence.
Do we have time for one more
Yeah,
question?
one more,
Yes.
very quickly because we are over.
Hi, you know, the parents now, I'm not a parent, but they're concerned about kids not playing outside. It's just like the adults, they operate the same way. They order stuff, like I can, you know, an apple delivered to my home. So basically people are not traveling for shopping and everything. So actually it refers to the previous speaker saying, you know, when you're home, you're not actually immobile. You can just start a chain trip from China to New York. And basically people are may not travel as much for shopping trips, and actually it's for, you know, making it more, you know, fun. You know, you just wait at home, the trip makes it itself, you just enjoy your TV and so on. So how do you place it in the picture of right to the city? You know, there's kind of a trend that people are avoiding this bubble, and shopping should be a commercial or social activity, but it's more like confined to your home, you just order it, and it's getting more and more popular, even like I said, groceries. I can order anything to my home. So how do you place this in the picture of right to the city when people are refusing to interact?
Yeah, that's a profound question. All I can say to you is that in the technology industry, we have an extraordinarily ugly term, which is called eating your own dog food. And eating your own dog food means that when you yourself use the services, systems, and technologies that you design and propose to the market. So that, you know, if you worked at Microsoft, you'd be forced to actually use Microsoft's crappy products. You'd be eating your own dog food. This is like an assertion of confidence in your own value proposition. I actually eat my own dog food as an urbanist. I increasingly inhabit the space of the city. I don't have earbuds in most of the time anymore. I try not to mediate my personal environment through the use of kind of territorializing bubbles. I try to live like somebody, not to be a Luddite about it and not to be a Mennonite about it, but I want to live like somebody might have lived before the advent of all of these things, because I think that these endeavors give something back to me, which is a set of competence, a skilled competence, a skilled way of using the city, and a sense of confidence in inhabiting space that I wouldn't have otherwise. I would argue as a designer that I would like to make this sort of framework of potential more available to more people in the hope that they might independently and autonomously discover the fruits of that sort of lifestyle without wanting to impose it on them. Because I think that the scenario of convenience that you talk about, sitting in my home in front of my TV, watching, you know, whatever, and clicking order, that strikes me as the kind of thing that would make me want to plunge a sword into my bowels. And on that note.
All right, on that note.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Our next speaker is Xuefei. Xuefei, where are you? Oh, come. Yes. You thought you were going to speak from your seat, comfortably installed. You don't have visuals or anything? No, okay. I'm sorry, I didn't introduce you. Right. In the third, my God, I know we cannot do that. No, because of course Xuefei, no, well, not of course, but Xuefei was one of my doctoral students at the University of Chicago, and she sort of zoomed through an institution which prides itself in holding on to its doctoral students for a good 8 years, you know, to make it all very, very serious. It is, I think, one of the great universities of the United States. She's now an associate professor of sociology and global urban studies at Michigan State University, the author of several books. The first, and got quite a bit of attention, Building Globalization, Transnational Architecture Production in Urban China, which was published by the University of Chicago Press and got several awards. One that just came out, Urban China, which I recommend. It's very, very full of very interesting information, which also has received several prizes. It was published in 2013. She has been a fellow at the Woodrow Wilson International Center for Scholars in Washington, D.C., and you're currently writing a new book on urbanization and governance in India and China. Xuefei. Talking about, oh, look, it goes like that.
Thank you. Well, thank you for inviting me. It's always a pleasure to be in New York. So the title of my talk is very big, The Future of Urban Mobility in China. And I'm just going to speculate about it. And to speculate, I think we need to go back to the past first. This is a picture I found from a website called Beijing Shots. It's a historical photo of the avenue in front of Tiananmen Square. It's in Chinese, it's called the Avenue of Eternal Peace, but it's not very peaceful, as you can see. So the picture is historic. It's from the early 1990s. So as you can see, there are many people riding their bicycles. So before the early 1990s, most urban residents in large Chinese cities commuted to work with the bicycles. And then from around the mid-1990s, the situation began to change quite a bit. So I think I have statistics from 2 years ago. So for the year of 2012, Beijing has more than 5 million cars, and probably 38 or 40% of the households in Beijing owned a vehicle. And in Shanghai, Shanghai is better. Shanghai had 2 years ago about 3 million cars, and 20% of the households in Shanghai owned a vehicle. So bicycle, before the mid-1980s in China, it was a cultural symbol. So when my parents got married in the 60s, the only gift my father gave to my mother was a bicycle. But from the 1990s, a bicycle somehow became a symbol of something else. It's a symbol of backwardness. So right now, today in Chinese cities, there are cyclists, but it's considered, if you ride a bicycle, then association, the image you project is you can't afford a car. So that's the situation today. So this is Second Ring Road, Beijing, during peak hours. The traffic is very heavy. And every day it's like this. This is so the average speed in peak hours in Beijing and Shanghai is quite slow. So I'm going to talk about just very briefly how city governments, what kinds of policies city governments in Beijing and Shanghai have been using to somehow improve the situation of traffic jams. So in Shanghai, since 1994, the city government started using a model called license plate auction. Not everybody, if you want to have a car, then before you buy a vehicle, you need to get a license plate. Otherwise, your car is illegal. You can't drive on streets. And this picture is so the auction takes place once every month. And the numbers, again, a little bit outdated, is from last year. So if we look at the more recent data, March 2014, to get a license plate in Shanghai, it costs $13,000 or $14,000. So that's how much it costs. Last year, I lived in Michigan, an hour from Detroit. I didn't have a car for 3 years. So last year, I bought a car, a new Kia Korean model. So it's more or less the price I paid for my new car. And that's how much it costs to get a license plate in Shanghai. So the implication is very clear. It means in Shanghai, if you live in Shanghai, unless you have enough disposable income, you can't afford to own a vehicle. So most car owners are middle class, upper middle class families. The poor, the migrant workers, they can't afford a license plate. And in Beijing, there's a different model. It's by lottery. So here it doesn't cost. By the way, just one more detail about the Shanghai situation. So last year, the city government raised $1 billion in revenue from auctioning license plates. And the city government used the money for improving public transit. So it's quite smart. So for Beijing, they have a lottery system. This is a picture of some probably transportation bureau. So it's a matter of luck if you can get a license plate or not. And the numbers on the right side of the slide is the probability of winning a lottery. So it's 1 out of 84 people. So there are 84 people bidding, only one can win the lottery. So if you translate that into percentages, it's 1.1%, more or less. So there are problems here. There are problems here too. So one of the consequences of the lottery system of allocating license plates is that there's a disconnection between you can say demand and supply. So people who win the lottery might not need to have a car. So their need might not be that urgent. And people who have to have a car in order to commute to work might not win the lottery. So you have it's a form of detachment from actual travel needs. And also for Beijing, not everybody has the right to enter to even enter the system. So foreigners, if you're a foreign student, if you are expat, and if you are a migrant worker from other provinces, then you don't even have the right to play. So that excludes basically all non-locals. Owning a car in China, what does it mean? Is it life aspiration, or is it from necessity? So the situation has changed quite a bit. In the late 80s or even early 90s, it was for the middle class. It was something they aspired to have a car. So it was considered a luxury until the mid-1990s. But today it's not a luxury anymore because a lot of families, middle-class families, can afford a car. And instead, it has become a necessity. The map on the right is Beijing. The right circle is the 5th Ring Road. So if you are middle class, like many of my friends, a few of my cousins, so they all live between the 5th and the 6th Ring Road. So in order to commute from, let's say from the 5th, West 5th Ring Road to the Central Business District, it's about 20 miles or 25 miles. If you take public transit, a subway, it takes an hour and 45 minutes. And if you drive, you have a car, then it's 1/3. So most upper middle class families would want to have a car because the city has expanded so much. So owning a car has become a necessity instead of a life aspirations or a luxury. So as I said, 40% of the Beijing households now own a vehicle. So there's a number of consequences, and one of the consequences is traffic jam, congestion. So this is a Chinese character. It means jammed, du. So that's one of the hot buzzwords these days. If you just type in the word in the Baidu or Google, you get very interesting images. E-mobility. And then another consequence is pollution, air pollution, super smog. And this is the Chinese character. It's called mai. It means smog. It was not there are probably between 1,500 to between 1,500 and 3,000 Chinese words used every day, and I didn't know the word actually. So a few years ago, I didn't know how to pronounce the word, and the taxi driver told me a few years, maybe 5 or 6 years ago, when I was back in China. So mai has also become one of the most frequently used words these days. The picture, the image, again, is from Beijing. The pollution is very bad. It's a collective disaster. But if you look at solutions, the solutions are very individualized. One of the most interesting, one of the most popular iPhone apps is an app to measure the quality of the air during the day. So the picture on the left shows 2 sets of numbers. The number above is the information released by American Embassy. So it's 2012, and the 270, it's a measure called PM 2.5. And then the figure below that is the information released by the local government. So always there's a gap between, there's a gap in the numbers, in the statistics between these 2 sources. So according to the American Embassy, U.S. Embassy, it's the weather, the pollution on that day was very unhealthy. But if you trust the Chinese government, it's moderately polluted. So that's example of the difference. So another example of individualized solutions. So these days, a lot of people use face masks. They put face masks even on their pets when they take their dog out for a walk. And then the two statues are from the campus of Beijing University. So I think that some students put face masks on these statues on campus. Yeah, this one. So a lot of celebrities wear face masks these days, and because you can't see their face, so some journalists put this image on the internet, and then the commentary was that because you can see their face, so the eye makeup becomes really important. That's what you can see. And this is these are two artists, so they were doing a performance art act somewhere in Beijing. It's a wedding, so the couple can't even kiss because the air is so bad. So the kiss has to be mediated through these masks. So what are the alternatives to cars? One alternative, if we could, go back to the past in the 1980s when everybody could commute to work with the bicycle, that would be very, very good. But it might happen. Actually, it's happening in Europe. In Copenhagen, I think 50% of the residents today commute to work with the bicycle. But it's not going to happen in China in the near future simply because the scale of the city, Beijing, Shanghai, cities have expanded so much. So to commute to work, you need automated vehicle, not pure manpower, not bicycles, not by foot, by walking. So if you look at the present, what's being done by the government, by urban planners, currently, the picture is not that bleak. It's quite promising. This one is the BRT, bus rapid transit system in Guangzhou. It was installed a few years ago, and it's very effective and efficient. The daily ridership is a million riders per day, and that's over the capacity of all 5 metro lines in the city combined. So it's much cheaper to build, and it carries many more passengers than the subways. I think this is the second only to Bogota's BRT system. What's it called? Yes, Transmillennium. Yes, thank you. So Guangzhou, that's Asia's highest capacity BRT. And the interesting, one of the unique features about Guangzhou's BRT is that it's also connected to metros. And for these BRT stations in the city, there's also space for bicycle parking. I don't have the numbers. I don't know how many spots for bicycle parking, but it's quite a bit, a few thousands. So that solves the last mile, problem. After people get off the bus, they can use their own bicycles and then get to where they want to be. So that's happening, and other cities are installing similar BRT systems. So when we think about the future alternatives to cars, there's a number of things possible. First of all, we can have a different infrastructure. This is called the straddling bus. It's proposed by a company based in Shenzhen. Shenzhen is one of the special economic zones in China. It's near Hong Kong. So the idea is that to have a bus designed in the ways so it can move on top of cars, such as in the picture on your left. And then the image on the right is you can see how cars moving in the middle of the bus. And a few more images. So maybe in the future, I don't know when, in 6 years or 20 years, maybe our infrastructure will change. We will have a new type of infrastructure which allows different mobilities to happen at the same time. So people walking, people cycling, and people driving, and then people riding metro, subways, maybe all these different modes of mobilities can happen at the same time without disrupting each other. So it's very possible. Few more pictures. Yeah, so the straddling bus, it hasn't been built yet. It's just a proposal. And this is happening. So a few of the previous speakers have talked about bicycles. The world's largest bike share program actually is not in London, in New York, in Paris. It's in a second-tier Chinese city called Hangzhou. Hangzhou is about maybe an hour away from Shanghai. So the city, okay, that's from 2 years ago. For the year of 2012, the city already had 65,000 bicycles for rental. I think in Paris there are 20,000 valids in the city, and in New York maybe 6,000 or 7,000 city bikes. So in terms of the quantity, it's the world's largest bike rental program, and it's been working very well. It's one of the most successful bike share programs in the country. Beijing had a program, similar program, but it failed miserably because of different factors, and one of the factors is the price. So Beijing priced it too high, so almost it's more expensive than public transit. So most people wouldn't use the bicycle. So the program in Beijing didn't work out very well. And this is something happening right now. There's a company called, the name sounds almost like candy. Kandi. It's based in Zhejiang province on the east coast. So they have been manufacturing electric cars, but not for sale, to rent. So it's an electric car share system in the same city, Hangzhou. So Hangzhou has many state-of-the-art transit programs. So the pictures are show how the actual car looks like. It's very small. It's electric. And the pricing is very reasonable. It costs 20 cents an hour. It's like a zip car, but so there are different stations in the city, and that's the parking facility. And the picture on the right is the actual factory. But let me see. Oh, I don't have numbers here. So the program is heavily subsidized by the provincial government, and without the subsidy, it probably wouldn't make a profit. So now, I'm not an engineer. I'm not a transportation planner. I've been writing about cities in China and India for a while. So I want to end my presentation with a few slides not about transportation. So there are ways to find solutions within the field of transportation to solve congestion, air pollution problems. But maybe there are also solutions outside the box, outside the field of transportation. So, and one of the key issues here for Chinese cities is actually housing, the prices of housing. The prices have become so high, so unaffordable, so most people live too far from work. In order to commute, they need to have a car. So if the housing prices can somehow be under control, can get lower, then people might be able to live closer to work. Then maybe they can, use bicycles to commute. So that's one of the elephants in the room, housing. And also, at least for our top-tier, first-tier Chinese cities, we need more housing for migrant workers. And this is an urban village in Beijing where migrant workers live. I took the picture last year, and the place was being demolished. So what happens after this urban village gets redeveloped? What happens is that the migrant workers will have to move away, far away from the center, and to rent all over again. So if they live on the periphery, the jobs are at the center, so they need to take bus to get to work. And most buses in China still use diesel instead of more clean forms of energy. So we need more housing for migrant workers, and maybe not every urban village has to be replaced by with high-rise luxury condos. And this is a picture of the traffic, the congestion during the Chinese New Year. The Chinese New Year is different, has a different date every year. It's about 2 weeks in February, from February to March. It's a lot of people travel over the New Year, and this is this image. This is last slide. It shows the magnitude of the traffic. It's the world's largest annual human migration, and last year, within 2 weeks, between mid-February to early March, 3.4 billion trips were made between cities, between provinces, from cities to the countryside. And most of the travelers are migrant workers, and a lot of them, just to give you an example, a lot of migrant workers are from Sichuan, and many of them work in Guangzhou. So what's the distance between Sichuan province and Guangzhou? 2,000 kilometers. So once a year they get a break, they can go back to their hometown. So they need to travel for 2,000 kilometers to have a family reunion. If there are jobs in their home provinces, then they don't need to make the trip. So I think that's just another example of the solutions outside the field of transportation. I'll stop here. Thank you.
Any questions? While we wait, let me ask you one. So what do you think is the actual future of mobility in China? Do you see the potential for radical transformations? I mean, the Chinese government, in a way, has been a radical intervener in organizing space, in organizing transport, in allowing foreign investment, et cetera, et cetera. And, for instance, I thought it was very interesting when the crisis begins to happen in 2008, the Chinese government picked up on the fact that many of the factory workers that had gone to the east, to the east coast, all those cities there, they came back and enabled them to set up little factories in the interior of the country, sort of building on the actual practices of people. So I'm just wondering if you have some sense, of how this government, which is willing to intervene and reshuffle things, in other words, unlike, say, our government that might not be able to make a transformation, do you think that the Chinese government actually could? And one thing would be, that you have, I know that they are trying to build 400 cities or something, so you make more cities rather than having these huge agglomerations. Any thoughts?
Yes, I think, first of all, the city has to change. So there are possibilities of very high-tech solutions, like the straddling bus proposal. So that's one form of intervention. But I think the power of high-tech solutions proposals is quite limited. The government can intervene quite a bit. I think so. Two things: the city has to be somehow more compact. So you mentioned that the central government announced that in the next 20 years, 400 new cities will be built. So most of these cities are smaller cities. Different, very much smaller, much more compact than Beijing and Shanghai. So if there are more people willing to live in second tier, third tier, fourth tier, very small cities, then I think that can make a very big difference. So, my sense is that the solution is not really inside the field of transportation; it's somewhere else. The scale of the city, where the jobs are, and other, policy incentives. Mm-hmm. Yes.
Thank you for the conference. It was very interesting. I'm Mohamed Ali Behbahani from Politecnico di Milano. That I'm here as a visiting researcher in Colombia. I have a question that is in my country.
A bit more in the phone,
yes,
so
sorry. My country has a lot of similarities in terms of the economic sector that you have in terms of the car production and car industry. And also I think this has some relation between India and China and Japan and all of these countries, that one of the main components of their economic sector is car production and car industry and factories. So, and also a lot of people who are working in these factories, and thousands of the people for making the machines and all these type of vehicles are working for the government as a main, how can I say, maybe as a main stakeholders for producing this type of development. So what is the future of this, what is the decision making of the government for changing the structure of the economy if they wanted to change and also to substitute it with other industry, and or because the main consumer of the cars in your country are all the Chinese people, and also we can see that India is the same, and also in Tehran is the same, and Tokyo is the same, and also they have the exportation, but the maximum of the user are the same people of the country. What do you think about the government?
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you for your question. It's an excellent point. So there are 4 pillar industries decided by the central government. And one of the 4 is the auto industry. So China has bypassed the United States a long time ago to become the largest car manufacturer in the world. And it's very ironic that I live very close to Detroit. So I think so to go back to your question, I think if the central government in the next 5-10 years still wants to keep the car industry as one of the pillar industries, then very little change will happen, because the industry it contributes a great deal to the economy. But there are other alternatives. For example, this electric car company in Hangzhou, in Zhejiang province, and it's very heavily subsidized by the government. So I think excellent point. It's one of the core issues behind the problem of air pollution and traffic jam. Yeah. Yes, please.
We have to be very, very short. I realize that it's quite late.
You have an image here of a mass movement of people in a short period of time. China, because it has such a huge number of people working at low income, has been able to build a huge high-speed rail system as well as metro systems, which, of course, we can't do that at all in the United States. I'm wondering how the labor pool and that ability fits into the factors into what gets done and the thinking. And is most of the imaginative stuff being done by second or third tier cities, like you gave the example of Hangzhou?
Thank you. So last month, the central government announced a new plan. It's called the New Urbanization Plan, 2014 to 2020. And it's a very thick, long document, but one of the proposals in the plan is about the point you raised, high-speed rail. So the goal is for the government is that in the next 5 years, before 2020, for any city with 500,000 people, they should be connected by high-speed rail. So it means there's going to be a massive investment in high-speed rail. But the problem, what's the connection with the migrant workers and the jobs? The connection is disconnection. So high-speed rail is priced very high. So it costs as much as taking a flight. So most migrant workers can't afford to use high-speed rail to travel. So there's a gap between the modernization drive of the state and the everyday reality. I'll stop here.
Okay, thank you very, very much. And we reassemble at 2:30 rather than 2:15, and then we will start promptly. Thank you.
cómo funciona. Ya vas a ver ahora acá. Pues,